Hello, good evening, and welcome to the TNT Show. I'm John Drummond, and I'm your host for the next 60 minutes. Thank you very much for joining us. Each and every time we do the show, I promise you an excellent guest, and tonight is no exception. We have somebody who is outstanding, and moreover has been outstanding for a significant time. So, sometimes terrific people come and go. It's a star that burns brightly and is gone. That's not the case with our guest tonight. So if you're looking for star quality plus tenacity, you've come to the right place. But first, a few words about the fact that this is yet another great day for British democracy. I mean, heavens, haven't we been delighted this week to watch the contortions that government ministers and prime ministers have gone through to try and justify taking freebies? Now, many of you tonight will be sitting there saying, you know something, if I take 25 quid from a supplier, then HR are on my case, and unless I have a decent explanation, I'm out the door, right? Well, I have to say, if you're an employer and you want people to behave well, sometimes you have to do these things. Now, I'm not saying 25 quid is the right thing. All I'm saying is that if the rules that apply to you, they ought to apply to everyone else. And what is it that's God-given about grubbing for votes that elevates you out of the ethical domain into some sort of moral miasma where you can say to people, I know I took that bribe, but you know something, I declared it. Think of that. Think of your interview with the HR department in which you say, I took the 25 quid, but you'll see on my expenses sheet, it says bribe, 25 quid. Hey, what's wrong with that? You know, I'm being transparent. Apparently, in the UK Code of Ethics, transparency it is more than moral, right? You can be as immoral as you like, as long as you're transparent. You know something? When I was at school, that sort of dodgy distinction didn't exist. You were either naughty or you weren't, and that was a fact. So how far have we drifted away from all of that, you know, where a prime minister can stand up in public and say, you know something, it's okay for someone else to clothe my wife. You know, imagine that you say to the HR department, I'm sorry about the 25 quid, but I sent it back. However, the nice person who gave me the 25 quid gave me a set of knickers for my wife. Do you think that would be condoned? I don't think so, honestly. I have to say that I've watched these contortions and I think this is nuts. At the same time as these folks are grubbing for clothes and tickets to watch Taylor Swift for their kids, ostensibly. Fancy using your kids as an excuse, as a shield for your bad behaviour. I mean, really, it's just awful, some of the stuff that we've seen. And fancy doing that, right? And doing all of these naughty things, and then turning around and saying, you know something, you pensioners are getting too much money. So we're going to stop that. And people respond by saying, yes, but a lot of folks are going to have to choose between heating and eating. Well, I don't really care. I want a whole chunk of money for being PM or a minister. I have my Mondeo. I'm sitting pretty. Why should I care? And furthermore, I'm here for 5 years and nobody can touch me. Have you seen the size of my majority? Hey, I can be as immoral as I like. And you can sit there and say, I deplore your behaviour. You know something? I don't give a rat's ass, because you won't get a chance to say anything until 5 years is up. Or unless my party splits asunder, which is probably more likely than the 5 years. But when I look at the sort of spineless individuals that represent the Labour Party in Scotland, I think Steer Cameron can rest easy in his bed at night, wearing his pyjamas, no doubt. It came as a contribution from some wealthy donor. And you have to ask yourself, why are these people giving? Why are these corporations and companies, firms, giving all this money to politicians. It's for one reason only. Right? You're buying them, right? So in many cases, this government is the best that money can buy. Without any further ado, let's move on and talk to Isobel Lindsay. Isobel, welcome to the show tonight.
Welcome. Good to be here.
Thank you for joining us. I hope I wasn't too unkind in my preamble, but I wanted to...
Not at all. I still can't make up my mind whether what's more disturbing is the fact that they're so stupid as to make this kind of mistake and not realise how the public will see it, or whether it's the sheer low-level greed and venality about it. Which is the worst?
I think they grow up in an environment where this behaviour is seen to be appropriate. In fact, I think the Secretary of State for Scotland said, all MPs do this, all politicians do this, as if somehow that... That's a bit like, you remember at school, you get your hand caught in the cookie jar and you say, hey, I'm sorry, miss, but they all do it.
Yes.
Yeah, you end up with a belt anyway, I'm sorry. I mean, or I did. Forget all that. Put that to one side. We'll no doubt come back to it if we get an opportunity. Isobel, we've got much more important things to talk about right now. But first of all, remind us all, how long have you supported independence?
Well, I would say I joined the SNP in 1967, but I was politically active, first of all, obviously in the anti-nuclear movement, the anti-Polaris campaign, and I was initially in the Labour Party Young Socialists in 1960. So I've been active since then. I left the Labour Party after 2 or 3 years, having seen how their position on nuclear weapons suddenly changed, not just on nuclear weapons, but on nuclear testing. Of course, we still had atmospheric testing then. And I just gradually, over a few years, started to think, might independence be the right way forward? And of course, in the anti-nuclear campaign, it was the first time, I was very young, I started at 16, but I did meet a number of SNP activists. Oliver Brown became a good friend. And so I had got to know people at the beginning of the 60s in the anti-Polaris campaign.
Terrific. So we're talking over 60 years.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well done. Fantastic. I sometimes get the impression the SNP right now is being run by people who've been there for 6 years, but with some notable exceptions, I hasten to add. Say, we've had a question already, and I want to take it because it's from a dear friend of mine, and I think it will also help people to understand your deep-seated commitment to the independence process. Elliot Bulmer is asking, could I ask you about your role in drafting the SNP's draft constitution for Scotland in 2002, which I think was sometimes known as the McCormick draft?
That wasn't actually 2002. By 2002, I wasn't in the SNP. Okay. Because, of course, if you recall the complex history, I had been very active in setting up the cross-party campaign, initially for a Scottish Assembly, then a Scottish Parliament, because I had felt the division that had been there in the 79 referendum was one of the things that had resulted in not a failure, because we got 52%, but just not a significant enough yes vote. Yeah. And that we had to encourage cooperation. Yeah. And after all the work, we had got the Claim of Right group set up with people like Neil McCormick, you mentioned, on that group. to write that claim of rights, setting up the case for Scotland making its own decisions and for a constitutional convention.
Right.
And the SNP executive had voted in favour of this when it came out. And then I think it was because, to their surprise, the Labour Party agreed to take part in it too. Then we suddenly had, I turned on the telly news on a Monday morning to find some office bearers saying they had decided to withdraw from the Constitutional Convention without consulting the National Executive, without consulting National Council. That's messy stuff from the past, but I decided, since I was convener at that time of the campaign for a Scottish Parliament, that the most important thing was to get a good devolved Parliament, because it was the best we were likely to get at that time, and to get as good a deal as we could. So that's where we were. But I say Neil McCormick, you mentioned, Neil had done a constitution for Scotland when I, in the 70s, was Vice Chair for Policy. He convened the policy group on the Constitution, and he did a lot of work there in that, and he was greatly missed. And of course, he was a strong supporter of the Constitutional Convention.
Yeah. Well, it almost seems like we're doing a rerun of all of that, because the SNP now has established, as I understand, though I'd appreciate some input if you can provide it, the idea of another constitutional convention, including all the parties, as I understand it. Is that correct?
No, I think they've talked about it, or some have talked about it. Keith Brown, for example, mentioned it. The difficulty is that it's grasping for gimmicky things. Now, I think ultimately a constitutional convention for an independent Scotland would be of enormous value.
Okay.
And trying to bring in as many voices as possible. But you can't do this with credibility unless you've got the support out there. By the time we got we were pushing the Constitutional Convention idea from the very beginning of the 80s. And it was 7 years before we thought it was credible to try and launch it.
Yeah.
And by that time, there was 70% support for a Scottish legislature, but not for full independence at that time. And so we had most of the civic organisations in Scotland, the trade unions, the churches, some business groups, etc., supporting this. So we could go into this with credibility, whereas we're not at that stage yet. We haven't done enough work. We haven't prepared the right kind of plans in depth, and we haven't educated the public as to what they mean, how they can work.
And whose responsibility is that?
Sorry?
Whose responsibility is that to do that work?
Well, I think it's something the SNP leadership should have done after the referendum campaign. So 10 years ago, they should have said, let's do research on why we didn't get another 10%, why we didn't get over that 50%. And the Scottish Independence Convention, we actually did with very limited resources, but we did finance a range of focus groups. I think it was Heriot-Watt University. Mm-hmm. Has some academics there who carried it out, so it was objectively carried out. And one of the significant things we found is that there were a whole range of people who'd voted no, but they weren't hard no. They were people who were open to being yes, but who felt there were some key answers particularly relating to economic security, that hadn't been effectively communicated. And we should have identified that 10 years ago. We should have done that research with all the resources the SNP had then, identify where were the weaknesses, what do we need, what are the questions we need to answer, how best can we get across to people. But that wasn't done. And there was lots of shallow bits and pieces done, but not in any thorough way. And I think some of your viewers may have been at the Scottish Currency conference, and I think you filmed it. And I think we can see the quality of the work done there. And you can look at a whole range of other areas.
I mean, I've seen a snatch or two of the conference, but I know the people behind it, and they have my full support. Were there any SNP ministers there?
Not as far as I know, but I only learned from
word that troublesome, Isobel.
Word of mouth.
I find that troublesome, because here's a group of people who've gone out of their way to take a very hard look at a very important, if not crucial, an essential issue that would have to be fully dealt with in the event of any movement towards independence. And no SNP minister thought it was worth the while turning up. What does that tell us?
And it's not just in that. I mean, we have had access to a lot of people with expertise. Independence Convention, we did a few years ago a series of transition papers with the very limited resources, that we have, not the kind of resources a government had. And we found people who had real experience and expertise. Well, we did a paper on borders, and, this was written by someone who'd had a senior role, who knew the practicalities and who knew the real solutions. So it's not as if these were things that couldn't have been done. They could have been done with even greater support and expertise, but they weren't.
Yeah, I have to say, as somebody looking at it from the outside now, I find it hugely confusing. And it's very complexing to know that we have an SNP government, ostensibly, which doesn't appear to be hugely interested in the actual mechanics of moving towards an independent state.
Yes.
It seems, on the contrary, to be hugely content with working with what it has.
Yes.
And I'm not sure a lot of people who support independence are content with that perspective.
Yeah. Now, I understand that being in government is enormously demanding. And it was, I can't quite remember which, it was a Tory minister way back in the 50s who, when talking about the cabinet, said, we spend our time not saying what should we do next, but saying how do we get out of this one. And that is the reality of a lot of the time in government. But that is no excuse for a party which over that period had huge resources, not identifying the kind of people who can do that work. And I don't think by and large, the Scottish Civil Service is perhaps the right organisation to do that, partly because they tend to have expertise in the areas of work that are devolved, and also because they are restricted in many ways by their position, and we shouldn't be expecting those to produce the papers. We should be going out and identifying our own expertise.
Absolutely. My own experience, very limited though it is, in dealing with the civil service, was on the subject of a constitution. And we ended up talking to a couple of lawyers who I thought were vastly ill-equipped to deal with the subject, but that was the closest that the civil service had, I suspect.
Yeah.
And I thought they understood the importance of a constitution. They seem to understand that almost every state that wishes to be independent produced a written constitution and said to the public, if you're going to vote for anything, this is what you're voting for.
Yes.
This is your rights will be respected, and this is the arrangements, and these are the controls over any government you might elect. I thought that was all very worthwhile. I don't think anyone that we spoke to thought that for a second.
Yes.
It's just like a damn nuisance. And in fact, I knew that for sure when they asked us to come back in. And at a somewhat flippant level, the paper we produced, in fact, Elliot Bulmer did it. He did all the hard yards. Somewhat flippantly, devoted a page to the head of state and said, of course, it could be a monarch if that's what the people wished. Well, heavens above, we spent 2 hours discussing that, and I thought, this is nonsense. It was like, we've been asked this question and we don't know the answer. Let's get these guys back in again, and see if we can ask them to dance around and give us some sort of clue as to what we should say to the people. But my impression was that the people who were, i.e. the ministers, who were in charge of this group of nice people, really didn't understand what they were doing, and therefore badly directed the civil service. Not that I thought it was terribly well equipped in the first place, but nonetheless, to be badly directed as well as badly managed is a real burden.
So the task ahead should be getting that serious work done in depth, but that's only one half of it. The other half is educating the public about how realistic it is, how practical it is. And that's quite a big task in communicating things that may seem quite complex, but people want the confidence to know that those promoting independence know
Let me tell
what
you,
model of independence is going to be.
I want to take that answer and extend it a little bit further and amplify it, if you will. One of the issues in doing what you've just proposed, which is entirely appropriate in my view and would be incredibly helpful, is that anything you do needs to be hugely well funded. That's point number one. Point number two, it will be opposed by all the media.
Yes.
Solidly. Who will look for the smallest cracks, the smallest bits of detail and amplify those and say, look, this is why this is rubbish. That's another issue for many independent supporters that really raises hackles, which is the media has been allowed to persist and actually it's become worse in its approach to constitutional change than it was way back when. And the Scottish Government's response seemed to have always been, but broadcasting is devolved. Well, even if we accept it on its merits, and I'm not sure it's not something that could have been challenged in a more constructive way by setting up your own broadcasting arrangements. But anyway, leave that to one side. Broadcasting nowadays is done the way we're doing it now. It's not done with towers and pumping data over. It's just not done that way. It's done the way we're doing it. We're enlightening more people tonight on independence issues than the BBC has done for 10 years.
Yes.
And I can say that without, it's not a boast. It's shameful, I should say that. Yeah.
And this is an enrichment in comparison to the tools that we had to work with in the past.
Exactly.
There are these opportunities there, but we do need the solid material.
Of course.
And we need them to receive the gravitas and their treatment.
Absolutely. So
from the Scottish Government.
If the Scottish Government was to set up a broadcasting unit on the internet, a bit like we're doing now, but properly financed, and every single government announcement was treated the way a news broadcast is treated.
Yes.
You don't need permission from Westminster to do that. We're doing it right now, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
How come the Scottish Government can't do what we're doing with bells on? But every time I see an announcement, the Scottish Government has done this. Very laudable. I mean, you must have seen them almost weekly. You see these, and they're hidden away on Twitter. I mean, come on, guys. I keep saying to myself, do what we're doing. This is not rocket science. The BBC is getting out of broadcasting because they can't make it work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the licence payer isn't going to pay for that nonsense they produce it for.
Yeah.
And they're all busy drinking in the last chance saloon. This is the future,
Yes.
and I can't understand why the Scottish government doesn't do this. I mean, broadcasting outfit, you can call it what you like, Caledonian television, or whatever the hell you want to call it, and take all the good data that you've been talking about when it arrives, as it arrives, and project it in a forum like this where it's challenged, etc., etc. Anyway, that's my beef over. Let's talk about more important things. Let's talk about the conference that's coming up on October the 5th in Edinburgh.
Yes. Well, the background to this, it's owning our futures and about autonomy movements in Europe. The broader background is about a decade or so ago. There was an organisation, a networking organisation set up. It was mainly the Catalans, I think, who were the driving force at that time, but Scotland was part of that through the Scottish Independence Convention. And the organisation set up was the Commission for ISEC, the International Commission for European Citizens. And it was registered officially as an EU civic organisation promoting self-determination and democracy. Now, over the years, it has continued over the years, and we have had meetings, conferences in Flanders, in Catalonia, in South Tyrol, in Veneto, various places. We thought it was our turn in Scotland, and we should take this opportunity both to try and strengthen these cooperative European networks for self-determination, but also to help each other out, to learn from each other, to find out what's working, what doesn't work, and also perhaps to find out things which will be of interest to the wider Scottish public. So we organised this conference, which is very appropriately at Greyfriars in Edinburgh on the 5th of October. And of course, Greyfriars was where in 1638, was it? I got the date right. The National Covenant was declared. And although that was about religion, but underneath that, it was also about Scotland's right, the Scottish people's right, to make their own decisions. So it's an appropriate location. And we have people wider, actually, than the current membership of ISEC. We've got people from 14 other parts of Europe, some of them looking for full independence, some of them looking for greater autonomy. And we're bringing them together. First of all, they will go to Holyrood in the morning, on the Saturday morning, and there will be some of the MSPs visiting with the group, and we'll show them around Holyrood. And then there will be the signing of the Edinburgh Declaration. And again, this is a declaration about those rights of self-determination, the need for decentralization in Europe, the respect for distinctive cultures and histories, and so on. So that will be signed by all the groups, and there'll be a photo opportunity there. And then in the afternoon at 2 o'clock, there is a conference at Greyfriars, and we're going to have to squeeze an awful lot of people in, because all the different delegates will be given an opportunity to say something about their own movements and what's been happening and what has been successful, what hasn't been successful. So it will be really interesting, because we've got delegates coming from Greenland, from the Faroes, we've got Sicily, we've got Sardinia, and we've obviously got Flanders, we've got Galicia, Catalonia, Basques, Welsh, of course, someone from Ireland. And interestingly, we thought it only fair, and we've got someone who's trying to promote far greater self-determination in Northumbria.
Oh, way to go. Way to go.
To really talk about the need in England for greater decentralisation and greater respect for the regions there. So we've got all these voices. And we also, in the evening, and if people can't manage in the afternoon, in the evening, you can come and meet all the guests. There's haggis supper ceilidh on at Greyfriars in the evening. You can get tickets for the conference and the ceilidh at Eventbrite, or going to the SIC website, and there you'll also get the contacts.
So what we've got on screen just now is that you can get tickets if you go to independenceconvention.scot, and people can get tickets there.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I strongly recommend it, because it seems to me that this is something which is very appropriate at this time. I mean, Europe, like most parts of the world, is going through convulsions about nationalism, about populism, the rise of the far right, the diminution of the left in many respects. In the UK, it's taken the form of the left has become the right, effectively. We have two right-wing parties. But that's not unique to here. Other places have got the same phenomenon happening. So I think it is terribly important that people get together and discuss these things. On a purely point of entire self-interest, I'm going to be in Catalonia tomorrow. I'm going to be in Barcelona tomorrow morning. Is there any information centre there that I can go to and talk with somebody?
I'm sure there will be. I'll give you the contact afterwards.
Excellent. That's super. Because I would love to touch base when I'm there.
I think one of the things in which there has been some change, I can remember going back late 1970s, SNP executive at that time, and of course Franco had died, and there was new reform in Spain, the prospect of regional assemblies in effect in Spain, and quite a number of people who'd been in prison for several years were out of prison, were campaigning and so on. So some of us on the executive moved that Jordi Pujol, who was the leader of the main Catalan national group at that time, who had spent several years in prison, we should invite him to speak at the Bannockburn rally, which was a big thing in those days. And there were people on the executive who strongly opposed this. And the arguments, there's still some arguments you'll hear now, but we don't really know what these people stand for. And they might have said things or done things, and it will be an embarrassment to us. And the Daily Express or the Daily Record will pick this up, and it's not worth it. Now, we won, narrowly we won. And Jordi Pujol, who went on to be the first president in Catalonia, won 5 elections after that. He and his wife came to Bannockburn. I can remember my husband, Tom McAlpine, and I took them for a high tea in Stirling. But it was both a marker of the fact that there were important strands in the national movement here that did want to link up. And there were those who had anxieties and doubts, and it's safer we stick to our one. And of course, it was a period in which there were the big problems in Ireland and the violence there, and don't let's touch anything.
I remember those discussions.
This isn't new, but it has grown, and I think the great majority of people now do respect the fact that there are other countries which have the same kind of issues, and providing it's non-violent, providing it's respect for basic democratic values, then we can't impose our views on other people or theirs on us, but providing there are those underlying principles, let's work with them and see if we can create stronger networks in Europe.
Well, the many papers in addition to the declaration. I mean, are you planning to put the proceedings on YouTube, or will people be able to look at what happened afterwards, or at the same simultaneously?
Well, Indie Live will be live streaming it, I believe.
Excellent. That's what I like to hear.
And yes, there will be edited excerpts from it. And people will have the opportunity, although each individual representative won't have very long to outline what, in many cases, are complex situations.
Sure, absolutely.
But delegates will have the chance to go and speak to them individually if they want to learn more or to make contacts.
Yeah,
so there'll be lots of opportunities.
Sometimes I'm struck by the differences in approach by the main government to the subsidiary governments, if that's the right term, devolved operations. I watched this. You've probably heard of Borgen, which is the Danish television program about government, and they had a couple of episodes on Greenland.
Yes,
and I thought the whole subject was treated very sympathetically, in a way that I would never ever imagine the BBC doing. Not in a million years. I mean, they had people on saying, this is why we feel that Greenland needs to be independent, and they weren't interrupted, they weren't shouted at. There wasn't a battalion on the other side to represent the Danish government. And the Danish government got involved, and there was all sorts of debate and discussions, and they were very concerned about the Americans getting involved and all that sort of stuff. But anyway, I just thought the difference in treatment was dramatic.
Yes, most certainly. And of course, the situation there has been rather complicated by the prospect of very important mineral, I think oil as well, but certainly other mineral findings in that vast area of Greenland. And the tensions over who owns it will be building up. But of course, it's against a very tragic history of the terrible treatment in the past. I don't know whether that has all ended, but in the past, the terrible treatment of the indigenous people in Greenland. So that is all there too in their history.
Absolutely.
Their views on independence, and it will be very interesting, I think, to hear that.
It's extraordinary the way that, when you look at colonial systems and the way that the centre treats its colonies, that there's so many similarities. And when I look at the size of Denmark and I look at the size of Greenland, it reminds me of the UK and India. The big difference being, of course, that India was an enormous cash cow.
Yes.
And it was abused for centuries in order to sustain the UK in the most appalling way possible. Violence but that's been the way things have been done. I'm reading some books on the American Indians just now, and they concocted this idea of what's called manifest destiny, which allowed them to remove Indians from their native lands, even though the government in Washington had already previously signed treaties guaranteeing sovereignty. I mean, actually, and what also struck me as fascinating was the number of Scottish people who were also Indian chiefs.
Yes.
Because Indian clans or tribes were matriarchal in many respects, most times. So therefore, the mother's name was carried through. And not lost in the midst of time. So there's lots of people like Alex McGilvery and a whole bunch of Macintoshes who were representing the Cree Indians and other Indian tribes. and going to Washington saying, these are my people, and you signed an agreement with us scarcely 3 years ago saying you keep the settlers out, and here they are, they're everywhere, you know. So it's the way the colonial mindset operates, it seems to me. There's this, whatever you've agreed to, you can tear it up if it suits you. And always that sort of thing goes on sometimes. Anywho, so the conference takes place on the 5th, and people can still go along because they can use the data that we put on the screen, or they can go to Independence Convention .scot and get tickets there. What is your, well, here's a question. Are any government ministers coming?
Not as far as I know, but we have made an arrangement for one of the assistants in the Parliament who works for one of the MSPs, who is going to be speaking to both a number of MSPs and some ministers, to invite them just to the, if they are available. I know many are very busy on a Saturday morning, but to invite them particularly to the signing session in Holyrood.
Yeah.
And also we will be inviting one of the Green MSPs and Ash Reagan, if she's available. Yeah. So we will be inviting those, and they will be part of the photo opportunity with all the different groups.
Yeah, I do feel it's important. I mean, I hope that a minister or two can make themselves unbusy and participate, because it seems to me this is an ideal opportunity. If you have a department in your government called Constitution, then you should be looking at the constitutions and the arrangements elsewhere, because you can learn a lot. You can learn a lot. The Catalonians have a particularly difficult row to hoe there, because, you know, there's a situation where they have the Labour under a constitution that expressly does not prohibits any independent status.
Yes.
The Constitution says that the territorial integrity of the Spanish state is sacrosanct. So that means that the whole state would have to agree. And that seems somewhat unlikely, perhaps, at this stage in time. But who knows?
Yes.
Some people have forecast an EU of 50 states at some stage.
This is why I think it is helpful to try to promote and establish the notion that there are very important fundamental principles of the right to democratic self-determination.
Absolutely.
That should be European-wide.
Yeah.
And to put governments like the Spanish, the British, well, we're not in the EU any longer, but a range of others, to put them on the spot and say, you're not accepting these democratic principles. So this is why trying to do this, have a shared declaration, try to promote this, try to get more and more signing up to it is important. And it is certainly important in the context of the Spanish independence groups.
Yeah.
Some of the areas are less well known to the movements here or to the wider public here, and South Tyrol is one of those. Now, I haven't been there, but I do, you know, from what I've read, something of the area, even to look at the architecture in the area tells you that doesn't belong in Italy. And of course, it was one of these areas that was given to Italy after the First World War, because Italy fought on the right side. It was taken away from Germany, Austria, because they were on the wrong side. And as far as I know, there are some in South Tyrol. It's that they have a very distinctive culture of their own and identity. And some of those are certainly pushing for full independence. There are others who would prefer to link up to Austria, but it's a real debate.
Yeah.
And, we can respect and understand the complexities of many of these situations.
Is South Tyrol the place that Farewell to Arms was set?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, I thought it was round about the fighting between the Italians and the Austrians at one time. Maybe I'm
Yeah, was. I mean, you may be right. You may be right in that. You can check that one up.
But you never know what to believe when you talk to authors. It's sort of so this is a major thing that the convention is doing. How is the convention doing otherwise? Is it healthy? Are you good financial state?
Well, like I think many of the movements and the organizations just now, they are in a period in which there's feelings of, I would say, disillusionment, but quite a lot of it is because people don't see a way forward. Now, since you had, if I recall, some involvement in the very early days,
I created it.
The Scottish Independence Convention was formed in 2006.
Yeah.
And of course, we didn't have all these indie organizations at all. The purpose of it was to bring together the parties that were indie supporting.
Absolutely.
And I remember at the launch, that was the period of the Rainbow Parliament.
Yes.
And it was to bring together the SNP, the Scottish Socialists, the Greens. I remember Robin Harper spoke at the inaugural meeting, supporting independence.
Yes.
Position changed since.
Yeah.
And there were a number of independents, of course,
Tommy Sheridan was there.
Time.
I remember that we had an executive committee.
Yes.
And the whole thing grew out of what was known as the Hatchbank Group. Because I think at that time I was constituency chairman in Oakhill and Perthshire, I think it was.
Yes.
And Hatchbank happened to be the place where I lived, and we had this little group that got together, and somebody said, let's make it bigger, and we decided to do the Independence Convention. And the SNP kindly assigned someone to be on the committee. And so did the SSP, and so did the Greens, and we used to meet at I think it was the Sheraton Hotel. And there was one meeting where we were all foregathered. There was about 20 of us. And a few people left, and we were reduced to about 15. Still core it. And all of a sudden, the doors burst open, and 25 guys came in and said, we are proposing a vote of no confidence in the chair. And I said, sorry, who are you? And they said, we represent the sort of Communist Party of Greater Glasgow or some such thing, I don't know. And and the secretary turned to me and said, what do we do? And I said, have you submitted a motion to that effect? No, we're here to exercise it. Unfortunately, our constitution requires that all such motions be entered in advance. And with that, much to my surprise, the whole lot got up and left again. So the convention almost became a Marxist.
Now it continued to do that cooperative work and had a number of events up until the referendum. And when the referendum was announced, it decided to disband because Yes Scotland was taking over.
Yeah.
And after the failure of the referendum, we reconstituted again. But the main purpose wasn't just that we would do a lot of things, but that we would be the place for people to come together and cooperate with each other and work out what we could do together. Yeah. And it worked quite well for a fair number of years. Unfortunately, as we've seen, lots of groups disagreeing, lots of problems. I think one of the things we will learn from other groups in other places. They have the same problems too in other countries, as we can see in Catalonia. And but nevertheless, we have continued to maintain an active, core organisation.
Good.
We did try to do in the transition papers some of that key work,
Yeah.
and we have remained in existence, which sadly a lot of other organisations have not done so. But our principal purpose was to bring people together and to cooperate as best as we could.
I
And we continue to have the political parties as part of this.
Absolutely. I think you've got a lot to be proud of, because you can boast this conference. You've sustained the organisation. As you say, these have been difficult times, because there's been a bias towards conflict and people getting upset about this, that, and the next thing, which suits the controlling government to a T, because that's why you stretch these things out. The history books are full of it. What you do is you if you're faced with a viable independence movement, the first thing you do is never say no, always say yes, but. And then when you're pressed again, after a number of years, maybe even decades, if you're lucky, from their point of view, you then say, okay, you're right, absolutely. So what we're going to do is put a group of people together, and what we'll do is we'll come up with some sort of fudge.
Yes.
But it's in your interest, because whatever we call this thing, it'll be your thing, and you can do with it what you like, And then what happens is that as they control the purse strings, that's an empty promise. It's meaningless.
Yes.
If you can say, I wish to run a successful independence convention, and I cut off your funds, what can you do? I mean, you still want to do what you set out to do. So they can say things like, well, we're never going to abolish the Scottish Parliament. You don't need to. You just cut off its funding, that's all. Or reduce its funding slowly. That sort of lingering death, as it were. And you either sit there and take that, or you say, no, I'm not. That's not acceptable, because the Scottish people didn't ask for this, and you've changed the rules, and there have to be consequences when you change the rules.
Yes.
Right now, there are no consequences. I mean, if I'm sitting in Westminster, tomorrow morning I can say, I don't wish the following thing to happen, and it will not happen.
Yes. The one thing perhaps in our favour, the thing that is enormously problematic for us, is that Scotland is so important in so many ways to the British state. And the things the British state really regards as important, its military industrial complex and that pseudo-international role, the resource base that Scotland is. So we're so important to the British state, and they are going to use everything that they possibly can to ensure that they hold on to us. But what is in our favour is that the British state, in so many ways, is a shambles. So we're up against, shall we say, an opponent which in itself is weak and inefficient, ineffective. And
aren't you troubled, though, by that very weakness, Isobel? Because some people have said that Labour will fail. People said that before they were elected, by the way. They looked at the promises, like Stephen Flynn did, and said, you can't make this work. And he told the whole world, he said, you can't make this work. And they said, yes, we will, because we have costed proposals. Turned out they had no costed proposals. They just lied. And there are consequences to lying, as unashamedly as that. And I think one of the consequences will be, but it would have happened anyway, I suspect, because of the nature of the British economy and how badly managed it is that they would have run into difficulties anyway.
Yeah. I think the Starmer government is probably about the most abysmal one of the Labour governments that I can think of. Perhaps, well, even the Callaghan government at times, on the basis that it went into power with nothing to offer. I mean, actually, the Blair agenda, there were actually quite a lot of reforms, quite a lot of things they had in their programme, some of which they did.
Devolution.
But the Starmer, the same was true of the Wilson government.
Yep.
But the Starmer government's going in there with no vision, with no principles, with no substance really, except we're in power. And so that means there is no guidance that they can give to making radical change, except let's just not rock the boat. Let's not do too much. And the public don't see inspiration. They don't see a way forward. That's what's in our favour.
Well, I'm not so sure. I'll tell you why. My worry is that a Labour failure in what looks like a catastrophic nature, hard on the heels of a Tory catastrophe, will leave people thinking, well, where do we go now? And there's always reform. And reform is saying, it's not you. You didn't make a mistake voting for these idiots. What happened was the idiots ran a crooked system. But if you vote for us, we'll get rid of all of these idiots and we'll replace it with a system that respects British values. I can hear the words now. I can hear the words. And my big worry is that the Labour is replaced at Westminster by a significant reform presence will appear at Westminster at the next election.
Yeah. The thing is, I was surprised. I think many people were surprised that reform managed to get in Scotland with hardly any campaigning in Scotland. Of course, we have to remember the Daily Mail and the Daily Express, etc. It still goes into a lot of homes, that they managed to get the amount of support they did. But I still think that ultimately Nigel Farage will not go down in Scotland. It may get that tiny proportion of really angry people who will just vote for anyone who looks as if they're stirring things. But I still don't think that Farage will establish roots in Scotland, because
I wouldn't see them making progress in Scotland. I don't think they need to, because of the electoral system in the UK. All they need to do is pick up a number of seats in England, and then I think that would have a major impact on Scotland, because then what would have happened is that Scottish voters would then see that there isn't a counterpose of saying this is the SNP, hasn't done all its sums, and a whole bunch of absolute right-wing nutters running things in Westminster. And I think maybe the quickest route to independence will be that, rather than sort of any work that the independence movement does in Scotland. That'll just be one of these things that just happens. Now, it will be a deeply unpleasant experience, I imagine, with these people in charge. But who knows? I mean, who knows what can happen?
And the important thing is we need to be ready for history and prepared for history.
Exactly.
And I don't feel just now that we are prepared. We don't know what's going to happen, and it may be the unexpected, but I don't feel we are prepared for it.
Yeah.
We need to prepare for it.
We do. I agree with all of that. Well, as I predicted, Isobel, this hour would go real quick, and it has done. I must say a sincere and profound thank you to you. It's been a pleasure. You're one of my heroines, I have to say, and it's been an absolute pleasure. And I'm so delighted that you were able to join us tonight. So that's it, folks. Another great show. If you can stick around for a few seconds afterwards, Isobel, I'd be terribly grateful. There we are, folks. Our hour is up. Thank you for joining us. Take care of yourselves. Join us at the next session. I see most of your comments are still coming in. My apologies if we didn't get to your question, but I hope you'll agree with me that the conversation with Isobel was more than entertaining. And as you know, We aim on the TNT show to inform, educate, and entertain. And I think we've achieved all of that tonight. Thank you very much. Take care, and we'll see you soon. Take care. Good night.